Go Black Podcast. Go Black.
Hello, and welcome again to the Dope Black Dads podcast. I'm Marcus Ramtahal, and my guest today is Darren Sital-Singh. He's the Managing Director of Studio Pi, an award-winning artist management agency that specialises in the promotion of underrepresented talent. Launched 2 years ago, Studio Pi has already worked on over 300 projects with progressive thinking brands including Google, ITV, Channel 4, The Body Shop, Sky, The Guardian, the list goes on. Prior to that, he was the managing director of upmarket men's lifestyle media brand The Jackal, publisher of Shortlist magazine, and advertising director of UK Esquire. And that's quite a lot. I've obviously read that off the page. Welcome, Darren.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me, Marcus.
I'm super excited to have you. I've often beginning these podcasts by saying I have the pleasure of getting all the creatives, but super proud of this one because actually we met at an event for Black History Month at News UK, didn't we?
That's right. Yeah. So they're the parent company of Studio Pi. So I was flattered to be invited and included in that event. It was a good event. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, me too. I had a great time. I think it was a bit too short, if anything. Yeah. I was knackered by the end of it.
It's like networking and meeting new people. It takes energy, doesn't it? It's a skill, it's a craft, and I know how you feel like coming back from that. You meet good people, you try and meet at least 3 new people or something like that. But it's exhausting. You got to do a lot of talking.
Yeah, but it was a great event, and there were some fantastic speakers and panelists, and I had an absolutely great time. I had the pleasure of bumping into you and learning all about what you do with Studio Pi. And I thought it'd be great for our listeners to hear about your company, your vision, what it is you're doing, because it sounds absolutely amazing.
Oh, thanks. You want me to talk that through now?
Yeah, go ahead, tell us.
So we launched a couple of years ago in a pandemic, in October in a pandemic. So, the first year was very, very difficult. But really with the premise that we recognise that there is underrepresentation within the creative sector. In fact, there was a government survey that year in 2020 which identified 4 categories. So that's people of colour, women, those from a lower socioeconomic background, and those living with a disability as being overtly underrepresented across the creative sector in all aspects of creatives. So the founder, Sachini Imboldinia, she's not with the agency anymore, but she founded it. She's a commissioner, and she was just fed up of seeing the same names, the same faces coming through to her as options for photographers, illustrators, videographers, etc. And being Sri Lankan, brown, female, entrepreneurial minded, felt that she wanted to do something about it. And I think the good thing from News UK's perspective is, regardless of how you view them and their brands that they have, they were good enough to say, look, we've got investment fund and we believe in this project, so we'll back it. And she did that. She, in her own time, put together a roster of 10 photographers and 10 illustrators. We've got 8 now and 15 illustrators 2 years on, and all of them from those backgrounds, or one or more of those backgrounds. And that's the mission. So far, business has been good. As I said, 300 plus projects with some great brands. We shot Ian Wright for a Google campaign last month. It went digital out of home across the country. So we're doing some really, really good stuff, but it's just scratching the surface. There's more to be done.
And we had a quite long conversation at the event. I remember talking about my experience is in front of the camera, and I've been working in front of the camera for 15 years now. And actually, when you stop and think about it, in all those years, it's very, very rare that you see people of colour, women, people with disabilities behind the camera in those positions of photographer, illustrator, director, even producing. And it's quite something. I remember we had this conversation as well. I did a job end of last year, where the DOP was a black man, and I remember coming home to my wife and saying, this shouldn't be weird, but the weirdest thing happened. And it was great, but also I was like, oh, hang on a minute, that felt strange to me to see that, which is why I was just so fascinated about what you guys are doing.
Well, there's so much conversation around representation in media, representation like in front of the camera. You know, so you can't really watch evening programs on the assumption that you're watching anything live with ads now, but that might have ads where there isn't a mixed race, mixed gender, a diverse casting within a lot of those ads. In fact, you know, it's probably harder now to find a middle-class white family in any of these pictures. But like I said, behind the camera, it's probably predominantly a white male crew. And so much of what we're doing is obviously drawing attention to photographers and illustrators through stills, through film directors we want to move on to, casting, stylists, set design, but anyone who's involved in the creative process or the production process of creative. And one of the things that we do with Pi Productions, which we soft launched recently, is to make a pledge. And admittedly, it's not my pledge. I didn't come up with this. I met a really inspiring photographer from the US when I was doing a panel for Black History Month 2 years ago. And he talked of a pledge called Double the Line. And it's something that's in the States, specifically around TV production, theatre production and film production, because it's more interchangeable in terms of the crews. But that whenever they worked with someone, they wanted to work with an agency or a client to essentially double the line on the crew, so that someone from an underrepresented background can actually have demonstrable and lived experience on set or within role, but also learning from someone who has had more experience, but they get paid for it. Because one of the issues is that there's quite a blockage and a lack of opportunity to get experience, let alone paid experience. So if we can do something like that by working with the brands and the agencies we work with to encourage them to just say, look, for a small extra fee, we're just talking about having one extra person, and we will make sure that they're from an underrepresented background. So you still get the expertise that you want to buy into, because again, a lot of it is about fear of risk or risk averse. So you still get the so we say the risk security from the team that we'll put together, but let's just bring in some people who might get an opportunity to experience that. And actually, I met a really interesting multidisciplinary artist today, and he challenged me a bit, and he said, look, I think that's great, but really, do you think you could go one further and say maybe it's double the project? And I was like, wow, okay. So maybe if we are shooting a series of social ads, social videos for a brand, maybe we just produce 2 more, but with a completely different team, to then give that team the opportunity to actually have created something, rather than maybe just have experienced what it was like seeing somebody else create. And it literally happened today, and I was like, okay, I'll take that on board. We'll think about that.
Yeah. I mean, as you said, still amazing what you're doing, scratching the surface. And I think very specifically, and I've posted about this before, just by the nature of what I do, my children have started to be involved in photo shoots and be involved in filming commercials or whatever it is. And the best part of that for me isn't that they're working. It's great if they choose to carry on, fantastic. But it's that they're being exposed to things that I wasn't even aware of. You know, my eldest in particular is coming onto sets going, what's that person's job? What's that person's job? Why does it take this many people to make a commercial?
What's a grip?
What are they doing? Yeah, you know, all that kind of stuff. And she's seeing things and thinking, oh, so that's a job. Okay, I never knew that. And I never knew that, you know, when I was growing up. Even when I started as a model, it was only when I started to work, I was like, oh my word, it takes a lot of people to get this over the line. And I'm wondering kind of how you see that challenge in the first place. It's one thing having an agency with all these creatives available, but do you find you're struggling to actually find people who are, you know, saying, oh, that's a career option for me, and being trained and coming into the industry? I
think specifically from certain backgrounds. So I know we sort of touched upon this, didn't we? But like, I guess culturally for us, like my dad came over from Jamaica in '56, and you know, came with a certain work ethic and a certain belief on the industries that you should go into. You know, there should be places that, you know, where you make money, you build a foundation for yourself, a life for yourself. In his words, meet a lovely woman, have a family, buy a house, all that sort of stuff. It was, you know, it's almost preordained in his own mind of how I wanted to do it. And I would say there wasn't necessarily a huge amount of pressure to go to university, but there was pressure to go to university. And I was the first out of my cousins to go to, you know, a university in terms of like the Leeds University or something like that. So an established university. So I know what it's like to have that sort of experience, but when we're talking to artists within the creative world, so if I had told him I want to be a photographer, oh man, I don't imagine what those conversations really would have been like. I don't think he would have taken me seriously at all. And I think when you're from probably predominantly West African backgrounds, Caribbean backgrounds, probably South Asian as well, there's an expectation that you're going into a certain vocation, if you like, where it's recognized that there's a track of money and credibility within society and reputation, etc. And I think the creative arts are looked at with suspicion. You know, it's looked at that I don't see how you can make a career doing that, and that's because it's just not well documented. You know, in the TV and the series and children's programs we were brought up, you know, it's doctor, it's lawyer, or it's policeman.
Yeah,
they're very preordained and very obvious and stereotypical kind of roles. Whereas, trying to explain what a DOP is. I mean, and admittedly, sometimes I have to remind myself what a DOP is, but, you know...
So, for the listeners, actually, who might not understand what you're talking about, what is a DOP?
Oh, now I'm on the spot. A DOP is a director of photography, and they would work with the creative director in the creations of films. So they would be the one who would shoot the film while you'd have a creative director essentially working out angles and how they visually want it to look. But ultimately, the DOP is the one who would do the shooting. And again, it's not very well read. So again, when I think of my daughter, and I think yours are a little bit older than mine. My oldest is 7. I don't think she's yet at the stage where she comprehends a lot of that stuff. But even just thinking about different types of jobs that she might be exposed to still feels quite limited, even though it's in our vocabulary and it's within media a lot. She wouldn't be able to identify many beyond that. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done at outreach level within schools, which takes money, which takes effort, which takes convincing. Then really you've got to be able to show to them that they can make money. And I was talking to someone who actually spends a lot more time doing this type of outreach, and their argument is that it shouldn't be the students that you're speaking to, it should be the parents, because they have the biggest influence, and it's their level of acceptance and approval that the pupils or the students would need in order to get their blessing to move into their area. I mean, then you think, how do you do that?
That's really interesting, because I do a bit of outreach stuff to schools, particularly with students, particularly primary schools, because, you know, just working in kids TV, I suppose, and having primary school age kids. And I'm often kind of trying to say to them, listen, you know, I'm not famous, but this is how I make my living. This is a career. It may not have heard that before, but actually there's lots of us out there, and you've got this option available to you as well. And it takes me back, pre-pandemic again, a shoot I did in Bristol, where the majority of this cast, just because of how they were casting it, was East Asian. So Chinese, Japanese, Korean, etc. And they were a bit older than me, and they were talking about their children taking their A-levels and choosing what university degrees to go to. And it was really interesting, because we had this assumption that it was going to be like kind of the typical South Asian and African thing of like, okay, well, you know, you're going to study accountancy or law or medicine and go into these professions. And these guys, you know, very well-to-do, very educated, were like, no, I'm telling my kids you need to go into the arts, because the world is changing and you want to be at the front of that. And there's, according to them, this huge rush within the community now to say, hey, you know, we need to start our kids playing instruments. We need to show our kids how to do videography. We need to tell them that getting an MA is a good idea. So it was really interesting seeing that kind of... Yeah. But also it was the way they described it to me was, this is a very calculated decision. It's like, this is what makes money now.
Fair enough.
But that was really interesting to see, because you've just made a really important point there about kind of convincing the parents. And actually, one of my very first Dope Black Dads podcasts was with David George. He's the head of influencer marketing at Mattel, and he's written a book called Black Boy Create, and it takes you through, it's aimed at kind of teenage boys who are thinking about joining the creative industry from both sides of the camera. But he also introduces the book saying, it's not just for you, but it's for your parents as well. I want them to see the figures of how much money there is in in this industry, that it's not a waste of your time, that if you've got a talent in this, you can make a good living in this, and it's absolutely fascinating. But I think the challenge, as you rightly put, is maybe reaching out to parents, and obviously parents are going to be listening to this and probably thinking, well, you know, that's all well and good, but how do I get my child into that?
How into the creative industry?
Yeah.
You know what? I reckon it's probably easier than it's ever been before, just simply because the amount of scholarships and programs, accelerated programs or internships that are specifically aimed now for underrepresented talent. You know, you've got the School of Communication Arts, who, when I last spoke to them, I don't know if they want me saying this out loud or not, but had struggled to fill the quota of scholarships that were deliberately aimed and positioned at underrepresented talent, specifically within Lambeth. And you sort of think, how? I mean, how has that happened? Because they are a highly reputable school, if you like, within the creative industry, and the contacts that they have and the pathways into ad agencies and the creative world from that point are exceptional. And then you have like Brixton Finishing School, what Ali Owen's doing there. They seem to be oversubscribed. They're doing phenomenal work. So there do seem to be a lot of opportunities, but outside of the mainstream education setup. Because I think once you're in the mainstream education setup, there's a different agenda, you know, and it's whatever they feel they need to push. And, you know, it's already an issue in terms of how much, I guess, of black content and black history is pushed within the curriculum, let alone talking about art. So it's interesting that the parents would be the ones that do it. And I'd be keen to know whether they themselves are in the creative industry, and then therefore they can see it, and then it becomes a generational. You know, my dad was a teacher and a lecturer. My mum didn't go to university, but ended up sort of working life, and then managed to sort of build her own business and sell her own business. So there's entrepreneurial flair within that, and education. So it feels both traditional and quite new. She's been very supportive of a lot of the entrepreneurial sort of options and opportunities that have come to me. But you know, I wasn't aware of a lot of that creative industry. In the school that I went to, it was all about law and whether you were moving up into Cambridge. And so I think it's just a bit about propaganda and representation. So the more we see about it, I mean, I don't know about you, but I was used to see, you know, the failed boyfriend in any sort of movie I was watching was probably in the creative industry or working as a photographer, right? And it would just be a rolling of the eyes at dad. Why are you going out with him? There's this guy who's got this solid job and he works in accountancy or something like that, you know.
Well, there was that classic joke, wasn't there? What do you call a guitarist without a girlfriend? Homeless.
I mean, that's what I mean. That's what we were conditioned to, right? You know, whereas now, you know, there are some photographers who are, well, they're doing very, very well. And actually, you know what? I bet there are many mid-level photographers who are also doing well. And I think the rise of influencers is another example of how you can make money. Admittedly, that is a very dark and dangerous and wild west situation, because it highlights that people go, well, okay, Molly May, I can make loads of money. But the reality is, for every Molly May, there's a million who are nowhere close to doing it, you know.
I'm trying to think who... Steph Smith spoke about that recently on one of her podcasts, actually. They really delved into the creator economy and where the money is in that economy. That's definitely worth checking out if you get a moment.
But at the top level, the exposure and the raising of awareness of content creators and another aspect of creativity is a positive marketing aspect for the creative industry. So I just think, you know, the legal industry, the accountancy industry, the management consultants, they've been doing this for years. They're institutions that know how to market themselves and know how to go after the cream of educational talent. Whereas when you look at the creative industry, there are many situations and many areas where they haven't really got their own act together and haven't unified and come together with which to then have their own little propaganda and their own little sort of media and outreach that convinces people to come in.
Actually, thinking about that, I was speaking to... he is a musician, but his day job is in a very important financial role, fantastic guitarist. And he was saying to me, as he's moving up the corporate ladder in this really swanky kind of IT-based finance role, he's struggling because the role there has evolved to, well, now you need to present to camera. Now you need to be able to put your ideas across in this medium and edit and do all this kind of stuff. And he's like, the people that are learning this at school now, whatever they go into, like, this is important. You need to be able to, even like I started out as a model, and I remember being, if I was ever asked to tape something, just sending files to my agent, being like, there you go, and they would use their software and stitch it together and send it off for you. These days, you've got to know how to shoot that yourself, edit that yourself, send it off, all that kind of stuff. And I just had to learn that on the fly. I mean, hopefully they're teaching it at school. But that's interesting that that industry is already saying, hey, we need to balance out that kind of thinking with some more creative stuff. And the other thing that occurred to me as well whilst you were speaking is, I remember specifically, I was educated in a state school in East London, and my experience of being there and my colleagues there was, yeah, you got to do a bit of art, a bit of music, a bit of drama, but the bare minimum, because in order to be seen as a successful school, we need you guys to be passing maths, English and science. And no matter how bad you are at that, we're going to make sure you pass. And very early on in my life, I worked, volunteered abroad with a charity called Rally International. I was in Malaysia for 3 months and Southeast Asia for 6 months. The majority of the friends I had on Rally were from public schools or privately educated. And when they talked to me about their education, it was a different story. It was, well, they just found what I was good at and they doubled down on it. So I met musicians who were like, do you know what? You're probably not going to pass science, but if you're good at piano, we can take you all over the world with choir tours and all that kind of stuff. Oh, you're good at sport, are you? Well, you know what? We've got cracking rugby facilities here. Don't worry about trying to pass maths. You know, you won't need it. Not in that sort of kind of vein, but they seem to be able to get away with, you know what, if that kid doesn't pass his GCSE maths, it's not the end of the world. Whereas I felt like for me and my peers in my school, it was very much like, if you don't pass English, maths and science, you will fail at life. And that was, it wasn't daunting for me because I was good at those things. But at the same time, as I got out into the real world, I was like, this hasn't particularly helped me. I've got great grades in it, but it's definitely, I don't think I've used it in my work since, maybe English, of course.
Well, okay. So I know what you mean. That there was, and I had a sort of similar experience at school. I was very lucky. I went to a comp, but it was a well-funded one. It was actually privately funded by a brewery until they realised that was inappropriate, and then they had to sort of out. So in our first year, when you're there, it's a very sort of strange Hogwarts almost ceremony where at the end of the first year, you would go to the brewery and you would receive this commemorative coin for having completed your first year. And then you're like, wow, what is this place? And they had a state-of-the-art, all-weather pitch, and they had a cricket pitch and a rugby pitch, massive grounds, without ever being private school. But at the same time, there was still a pressure to deliver on the core subjects. But you could tell that those who excelled in sport and those who excelled in music in particular, they were invited into other little areas in which they could excel. And that's an acceleration. And I don't know, I've got a friend of mine who works in education, and every now and then he tells me about sort of the pressures to deliver from a funding perspective on the core areas where you do in order to receive your funding. And you start to think, well, that's a bit of a topsy-turvy setup then, isn't it? Where the funding is dictating where you need to excel and then deciding which of your pupils can excel in that area. So I love the idea of just identifying, however loose a thread, a passion for something, and then allowing them the freedom to run with that. Because I did maths, physics and history at A-level, and I struggled really to kind of get through those. I then went and did civil engineering and architecture at Leeds Uni, and I nearly busted out first year. I had 7 resits in my first year. My dad lost his mind. Man! But, for him, I finished it. And I got out and I finished my degree. But do I think now that I look at using double integration mathematics in anything that I'm doing right now? I'm solid at maths and I can do my forecast for my business, but you start to think about real use things. And my daughter, just when I was explaining about the podcast and why I would be on it, etc., we got talking about university. And she's like, "Oh, do I have to go to university?" I said, "It's entirely up to you. It's entirely up to you to decide what you want to do. I'm not going to push you into it." And it felt like the right thing to say. It might feel different in 10 years at that point. And she was like, "I don't think I'll go." Oh, we'll see how we go there. Oh, you got 10 years. It's all right. You don't have to worry too much. You can relax.
That's really interesting. My eldest is 10 now, so the clock is ticking. And she often asks me, do I have to go? And I often say, you don't have to. But at the same time, she she's got a few different aspirations. One that's been with her for a long time and stuck for a while is she wants to be a Lego engineer. You know, the guys that design and build Lego, which I had to start looking at it. You need an architecture degree for.
Know about that?
She just came in one day. Was like, so who builds this? How do they build this? How do I do that job? So I had to look it up, and I was like, you need a degree in architecture or computer-aided design.
Oh my word.
So if she goes down that path, it's going to cost me a lot of money. At the same time, you know, she's got lots of other things she's interested in, and it's interesting. I feel we're at this weird crossroads, and I don't know if it's the times we're living in or the jobs that you and I do, but both of my children, 7 and 10, are having conversations with their friends about, you know, what do you want to be, what do you want to do, which, to be honest, my wife and I don't tend to entertain, because we're like, well, you know what, I'm 37, I still don't know what I want to do. I just fall into kind of different jobs that I've enjoyed, and I have lots of different roles that I do now. And they're saying, they're going to school and their friends are saying, what do you want to do? And they start reeling off, you know, Lego, engineer, model, theatre, whatever it is they're into, nail technician. And their friends are saying to them, oh, well, you can't do all those things. You have to pick one. And then they're saying, but my dad does about 5 different things. So hopefully, you know, it's a good thing that I'm showing them there's lots of opportunities and paths you can do simultaneously. But it's interesting that they're getting pushback already from their peers at school. Actually, no, it's not an option for you. Why are you dreaming?
Yeah. The conditioning is already there that it's sort of one job, one life. That's the track that you're going to have. Which makes me feel a little bit sad for their parents if that's how they feel that their things are going. I mean, I don't know if I hope that's not the case. But I love it that they could start to get a sense of options. Multidiscipline, you know, and again, it's interesting when you sort of, I guess, slightly bring it back to some of the artists that we talk to. Some of them don't really like being labelled as a photographer. You know, it's I do photography, but I shoot film. You know, and I actually do some Web3 stuff. I've done some NFTs, and you're like, okay. And so this term sort of multidisciplinary, I think, was for quite a while quite a wanky term. You know, it's quite multidisciplinary, whatever you want to call yourself. But actually the reality is they're just multi-skilled and they're just passionate about many forms of art. And I think if that can start to be bedded in with our children a lot earlier, and the idea that you can try something, do it for a couple of years or less, it doesn't matter. You know, it's this entrepreneurial world now where I feel thankful to be part of, where the idea of failing. I remember when I had my first business, the Jackal, with a couple of guys, and I left Shortlist, and one of the senior people, one of the execs, said to me, "Oh, let's have a chat." But, you know, it's, "Oh yeah, he goes, well, you know, you do realise that, you know, if you go on and do your own thing, and if you fail, you know, people always remember that you failed." No, I was like, what? And I'm not going to swear, because that's how I felt. I felt like swearing. But it stuck with me all the way through. And I did fail. But I made sure I read enough books and I spoke to enough other entrepreneurs who had failed, and understanding that how failing is a good thing. And actually, as long as you learn from that, and it's not like a big fail with a big fat F and it's marked on my head forever. You know, I learned a lot from that experience. I sort of 2.5, 3 years. But what I learned is that actually it isn't necessarily that the idea might have failed, but I've learned from that and I can take something on. And here I am now in another sort of entrepreneurial sort of mindset, fledgling business, taking everything that I learned then and pouring it into this. So you don't necessarily fail, that doesn't work out, and you take that with you into the next thing that you do. And I really want to try and instill that sort of philosophy and understanding in my daughters, that it's okay to have tried this, but you've learned from that and you can move on to this. And education might not necessarily be the thing that allows that fluidity to move around and experience lots of things. I'd love to think that it might be for them, but from what I'm seeing at the moment, it still feels like you have your choices and you'll pick your course and you'll do this and that'll be your 3 years. But beyond that, the whole world is open. So
and it's interesting, you know, there's a real path of growth when you do put yourself out there, and we are starting to hear more. We're articulating it as failure in a good way. So I have very similar experiences. In fact, I did a talk for Black History Month last month, and I thought it was just like a Q&A panel thing, and they're like, no, you're going to speak for 15 minutes as I got onto the call.
Long time.
So I was like, okay, fine. And very heartfelt, very off the cuff, I said, you know, I used to describe my life as a series of happy accidents. Reflecting on it now, my life is a series of failures. And I took from the age of 17 right the way up to now, everything that I failed at. But the flip side of that was everything that I learned, all the perseverance, all the times that people were like, really? Professional musician? Self-taught? How's the band going? Oh, okay, oh, right. Oh, yeah, oh, you're acting now. Oh, it's lovely, okay. Yeah, and also, you know, lucky enough to have achieved some great stuff in those fields now, but still having achieved all those things, still having conversations with, are you getting enough acting? Okay, you've got enough work going on, and realising that's going to be people's mindset for a very long time.
Are you enjoying yourself? Are you enjoying the experience of all of those?
Do you know what? I'm absolutely loving it, and I think as well, I've been working, doing a lot, so outside of all of that, do a lot of coaching and mentoring, which I love as well. And I'm speaking to a lot of young people who are like, I don't understand how you are, you know, kind of wacky children's TV person one day, and then very serious leader, coach, personal development person this day, and you're just able to do it. I'm like, I just love those things. I have no shame in liking what I like and indulging in those things, and feeling that I'm actually pretty good at them, because I'm obviously, you know, making a living from it until someone finds me out. But also, I suppose the key part of that, and it's a really interesting question, is I feel like those young people who I'm working with are inspired to go, hey, I can be whatever I want to be at the same time. I can be an entrepreneur, but also a creative, but also this, but also work in, say, local government. I've done a lot of work in local government over the last 2 decades. And that's okay. And that's completely possible. But I realise it comes with a lot of challenges, which is why it was so interesting hearing what kind of work you're doing, thinking about the challenges you must be facing as well, and coming back to that idea of, well, are we getting enough people from those underrepresented backgrounds going, oh, that's a job for me, I could do that.
I think and also it's just breaking the idea of what's normal. You know, there's, you know, the idea of the working week, the working hours, the one job career and things like that. You know, I've always looked, you know, the longest I stayed in post or stayed at a company was 8 years with a Squire, and I had a blast. You know, I was 24. I had a business card that said fashion manager of a Squire. I literally abused my situation, swanning around town, behaving like, if that was my kid now, I'd be clipping him around the ears saying, come on, sort yourself out. but I enjoyed it. You know, I had 8 years and it was a wonderful time. But now I look at anyone who's been at a place or stayed at a place for a long period of time, and I respect that that's what works for them, but it just doesn't work for me. I wouldn't have learned what I learned at Shortlist or the Jackal or the year I did consultancy or being part of Studio Pie. I just feel I'm so much more rounded and more broadly educated from a work perspective that I don't think I could ever have been if I'd have stayed up. Now, there are moments, obviously, you know, when you look at your bank balance at the end of the month and go, wow, if I'd have stayed somewhere, I'd be on this salary. But it's all ifs and buts and wouldas and couldas and who's. I might be made redundant and then not got back into somewhere. So I think being able to sort of dabble and experience many things has been my preference now, and I hope that obviously with Studio Pie we can build this up. But it's the variety of work within that, and also the conversation. You know, having a mission. In fact, it's interesting you say coaching actually, because I'm doing some professional coaching, and he was introducing me to sort of this pyramid, this NLP pyramid, which talked I think at the bottom, I think something like environment, behaviour, skills or something like that, and moving through in sort of identity, beliefs and mission. And so the majority of people would have synergy with the bottom three in terms of they like what they do, who they work with, the place that they work, the things that they do day to day. That's probably most people's acceptance of what I want from my role. But you start to then question or start to doubt whether it's the right type of thing. Does this role speak to me as who I am as a person? does the mission of this business and the role that I do match my own beliefs and values? And then you probably start to think, no, it doesn't. I'm in a corporate place and it doesn't really suit me. For the first time ever, I've had it flipped. The mission of the agency, I'm actually on board with. It's about promoting underrepresented talent, fighting for them and getting those equal opportunities. The beliefs speak to me, the identity of who I am as son of an immigrant in terms of the experience within this country, albeit what feels like a privileged one that I've had, but I understand the differences. But it's not a fully firing agency yet. It's not as big and as large as I want it to be. We've got visions of New York and in Paris, things like that. So there's a lot of work to be done that makes it at the bottom part really unstable. So it's interesting sort of as you go through your career, the different things that come to you. But I think I must be I should be very thankful for having beliefs and missions and identity, because finding that feels at times holy grail stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And it really resonates, again, going back to, I talk a lot on here about my work in the creative industry. I don't talk a lot about the kind of corporate work that I do, not because I don't love it, just because it hardly ever comes up. And doing a lot of work in local government still, people are like, oh, you must do that because you need to do it. Like, that must be your day job to pay the bills. And actually, there's a real passion for what we're trying to achieve there. I've been in it since I was 17 years old. I've seen real positive change, and I want to be a part of that change as well. And kind of, I feel I've got a lot to offer from a very different perspective to the general corporate world as well. Doubt. I'm just thinking, as you're talking about, the day-to-day of being creative, potentially a lot of our listeners might not be aware of, you're not doing like a 9-to-5 office job, or a job that, as you spoke about before, you see on the telly quite regularly. So what's a typical day or week look like for you in your industry?
So I think for us, it's probably a little bit more atypical than, say, true creators, because we are management of talent. So again, for those, let's face it, I didn't know much about managing talent until I came into managing. You'll probably know more than me. Being in talent, you've probably got a specific view about agents, which you're not going to air on this podcast with me here. It's essentially a service industry, and I can't liken it to anything else other than recruitment and estate agents, right? So we, as a business, a Studio Pi, don't actually create anything ourselves, which is very alien to me. I've had 20 years within media and publishing where I've always been part or connected to creators and maybe monetized their unbelievably talented creative skills. So here, we are agents. We take a percentage of the jobs that we bring for our talent. So it's them really. So our day-to-day isn't too far off what you would expect a typical sort of sales team role. It's still Monday to Friday. I do a 4-day week, which still raises eyebrows for many people. But it's important to me that I have that balance of a 4-3 split, and I get the work done. That's ultimately what needs to be happening. But primarily our objective is about networking, engaging with clients, with agencies, so that our artists are as visible as possible with their new work, and that they're in a position to be thought of. And the trickiest part is that art is so subjective that there is no yes or no. It's, do you like this? Oh, no, you don't. Oh, okay. So I guess we won't be working with you. So we'll now go have to find someone else. And you can't really argue that. You can't really say, well, why don't you like it? I like it. And well, because I don't. It's my perception of that image. It's how I take from that image, from my lived experience, whatever prejudices or preconceptions or bias I might have. And you can't sell against that. And again, that's quite an alien, for me, an alien sort of proposition, because normally it would be a media plan or an audience. You'd be like, well, it's clearly this or it's clearly that, and this is better than that, this is better than that. You can construct an argument. So I'd say it's day-to-day. For the artist, though, it's very, very split. A lot of time is spent on thinking about their own personal work, because you need to have a certain level of personal work happening to stay fresh as an artist, to feel like you're active. Then obviously you want to be making sure that commercial work is coming through, and that's obviously our role to do that. But on top of that, they still have to make their own relationships. So many of our artists have relationships with brands already. One, Madeline Penfold, has a very strong relationship with New Balance. And outside of our relationship with New Balance, she's commissioned directly to shoot Sadio Mane or Coco Gauff, etc. So Depending on how busy they are, there's a lot of that work. But I think one of the things I underestimated is how much you really have to support the artists really through their day to day, because they're not working. They're very rarely working as much as they would like to work. And again, that's quite alien to me, because you get paid, right? You have a 9-to-5 job, you work, and you come home. Whereas for them, if they're not putting in the energies, they're worried about whether that's come through. And it's a much about man management and personal management and emotional management and emotional support. And then their confidence might drop, and you feel like you've got to build them up. And again, I'm sure that, Marcus, you've had, or maybe you haven't had, low patches where you've not
absolutely resonates with me.
You've not been selected, and you start to question: Am I relevant? Was it this? Was it that shot? Do I need some new headshots? It's all of that goes to the mind.
All of that sort of stuff.
You need a strong agent to be standing by you to be able to say, "Oh, listen, this is quality work. It will come. It will come." So it's a completely different change to what I'm used to, and far more emotional. So when you win projects for your artists, you feel like you win with them and you win more.
Yeah.
But when you don't win them, it's just personally devastating at times, because you don't want to deliver that news, and you knew they wanted it, and we put so much work into it, and whereas before it was a corporate, quite a black and white, well, we didn't win that project, we'll move on to the next one. Now it's like, I feel like I've got to do something for that person specifically.
See, I think over the years now, I've become more black and white about kind of, I didn't get that job, I'll move on to the next one. There are a handful that I can still think, oh man, I really wanted that one. One of them, and in the Odd Socks Andy in the band, was one first time in a long time. That was 5 years ago. I walked into audition room and I was like, I really want this job. There was a lot of people there, over 100 different people auditioning.
Wow.
And I was like, I really want... And I was up against some incredible musicians and actors. And who knows how I got here today. I'm grateful that I did. But that was the first time in a long time where I felt that, oh gosh, I really want this job. Not that I didn't enjoy my work, not that I didn't want to win contracts and shoot jobs. It was just I kind of got used to that. That's how the industry works. You don't get this one, you'll get the next one. Or, there's always going to be another commercial. There's always going to be another photo shoot. That kind of abundance mindset, I suppose. But it's interesting because today I had to do a self-tape for a job. And that one came through. And it wasn't necessarily... The job was great. Really funny script. When you read a script and you're laughing out loud, it's like, that's fantastic, brilliant. And then I'm invested now, I really want this. And it's shooting abroad as well. And one of the reasons I work in this industry is I love to travel. I've been really fortunate to play music on 3 continents and, travel away for shoots and things like that, and have some very unique travel experiences as well. I think that's the really important part. Like, you could work a 9-to-5 and take 3 weeks holiday and go to Spain or Greece or wherever and just sit on the beach in a hotel. But I've seen the world in a very specific way that a lot of people won't have seen it. So this job's shooting abroad as well. I'm like, oh man, I've fallen into this track now. I really, really want this. You get the message from your agent and you kind of, there's like an endorphin rush. Got a message from my agent. No. What is it? And then, I had another message about another job saying I was penciled for it, and I was like, penciled? Maybe I'm going to get it.
Did you get it?
I only got the pencil today.
Oh, this is live. This is something that's going on now.
This is today, yeah.
Oh, well, I wish you all the luck. I wish your agent all the luck as well.
But that's interesting as well, because you're coming at it from a point of view where you're absolutely right. If you speak to a lot of people in the creative industry, particularly I'm thinking about models, actors, presenters, there's always something about an agency or an agent and people being annoyed. And maybe it's because I've been in it so long, or perhaps just got really good agents. I feel a lot of empathy for the role that you guys have and what you've got to do and what you've got to put up with. And also that thing about managing people and managing their expectations and maybe some people needing a bit more attention than others. And I'm always mindful of just being timely with my replies, making sure I submit things on time, trying to make that relationship as smooth as possible. But it's quite a task, isn't it? And it's interesting you're talking about it's like sales, but it's also creative. Do you find that side of it quite fulfilling, that you've got that mixture of things and you're able to really get involved with people, or is it more of a challenge?
No, it's absolutely the best balance. So look, the days where you know that you've got to do the outreach and send out 200 emails and personalize them and tweet them and make sure that yours is something that sits out or that stands out versus all the others that are coming in, or you've got to curate the imagery for a deck and things like that. They can be the tougher days, and I can see that in my agents that it's when they're quiet or their headphones are on and you realize, okay, they're just in the zone, they need to get through this period. But when a brief comes in, is when the agency comes alive. And that's even before maybe we've spoken to an artist, because we're already starting to formulate ideas. We're already starting to think about how we might be able to help guide the artist. And then when we bring them in, it just takes it up another level, because then they bring their enthusiasm and their energy to it. So that's what I mean when the lows are the lows, because it feels like collectively we've lost this, even though in fairness the artist might feel that they had, but it feels like collectively we lose that. But I think the balance, without that element of creativity, I don't think anyone would want to be an agent, if I'm honest. And again, that's no disrespect to recruitment or estate agents, but I think you need to be involved with that. So again, when that Google brief came in, it was just exciting to be part of that, and to be in a chemistry meeting and be in a pre-production meeting. And I think my fear was that when I first got invited to have a conversation about this role, and I didn't really know much about agenting, that it was purely sales. But actually the involvement in creativity and actually the expertise and sort of authority that you can have even before your artists have met with said commissioner is powerful. So I've got nothing but respect for all the other agents out there, because they know their stuff. Like they really know the stuff. And actually they probably do photography or illustration or shoot videos, and have just decided this is a nice way to probably get a more regular income while maybe doing some extra stuff on the side. So, I don't necessarily have that creative part of my brain firing like some of my agents do or some of the team do. I have the business side of things. But I think without that balance, I go mad pretty quickly.
I think I'm the same. I quite like the variety and not being kind of pinned down to one thing. And I love that collaborative work, every day that I am on set. And it's interesting, some people think, because you're a professional in this industry, you must be on set every single day. And that's not where I spend the majority of my time. It's where I earn the majority of my money, but my time is spent filming self-tapes, managing the emails, doing the kind of day-to-day grind of being a model and actor. In the olden days, running to four castings a day and running around London with your portfolio in your hand and all that kind of stuff. But I always remember, and still, 15 years in, every day I step on set with a brand new team of people who just want to create something amazing, I finish and I'm like, I wish I could do that every day. Because it's such a buzz.
Do you ever get imposter syndrome? Do you ever turn up? Because you don't sound like you do, but I mean, for me, there are plenty of occasions where, maybe less so with this, because you've made me feel very, very comfortable, but doing panels and things like that, I'm always in the 30 minutes in the run up to it, it's like, do I know anything? Does anyone want to hear from me? And then I have to almost reread my CV and go, no, I do know a lot of stuff. I think I'm all right. But I can't overcome that initial sort of 30, 20 minutes of, am I going to be good enough at this?
If you asked me when I was 25, I was so cocksure and arrogant, I'd be like, no, I know I'm the best. With age, probably, I suppose, and experience comes a bit of it. I'm very confident as a presenter and as a model, because presenting is the only thing I've actually trained in, and I train people to be presenters, so I'm very confident in that. Yeah. Modelling is the thing I've done the longest, 15 years, and I learnt my trade on the job. And it's one of those things when you try and explain what it takes to be a professional model, it's really difficult to explain to people, and they don't really understand how many times I try and explain my job, what it is, how it works, how you get into it. There's no school for it. No one tells you how to behave at an audition. No one tells you what a headsheet is and how to fill it out. You just turn up and hope someone's going to show you, and you learn your craft along the way.
Don't you just watch Zoolander? I just assume that.
I've never seen it. So, I mean, I've never seen it, so I can't say. I did, though, and I talk about this a lot when people do ask me about that part of the industry. I used to watch America's Next Top Model, and it used to really baffle me how they'd get to episode 10 before they started to go to castings.
Oh, right.
And I was like, this is the job.
Yeah.
This is what I do most of the time, is attend auditions. So why are they only doing it now? But I remember I did a job, gosh, I must have been 5 years into modelling. Shot it up in Oxfordshire. It was for a magazine. So I was booked for the whole day. Turned up in the studio, and the client's shooting for about an hour. Then they disappear and they're having a few whispers with each other. And I'm like, oh God, like, are they not happy? What's going on? And they come back. So Marcus, we've had a discussion. Thing is, we've booked you all day, but we've got it. We've got it already because you're so good. So we're going to have to pay you for the whole day, but you can go home.
Winner.
And I was like, that's great. You know, thanks very much. That makes me feel great. You know, sorry you got to pay me for the whole day. But they were very open, and they said to me, the thing is, we shot this already with a friend's nephew who's also a young black man with an afro, and we shot it all day, and the client was like, this is rubbish. So then we were like, we need to go to a professional agency, get a professional model. So we've already hired a studio twice, we've brought you in, it's taken you an hour, and now we're kicking ourselves. And that was a real wake-up call to me, that actually there's a reason you're a professional. Yeah. So I took that into everything I did modelling going forward, being like, do you know what, you're really good at this, you might not be the right person for every job, but there's always going to be another job, and you deserve to be paid what you get paid. Imposter syndrome though, still, when it comes to acting and music, because I'm not a classically trained professional actor. I didn't go to drama school. I work with some incredible performers. They know their craft inside out. They absolutely adore theatre. They love watching film and TV. And it's a pleasure to work with them. It's a great way for me to learn. I love learning on the job. I love learning from people who are better than me. They're also fantastic musicians, all of them. Not just fantastic musicians on their instruments, but on other instruments. And I remember winning through that audition process and being like, wow, that was lucky. I need to go home and practice, which is a great motivator. But certainly in those situations, still feel it. I'll take the positives from it because it inspires you to kind of work harder and get inspiration from other people. Yeah, if it ever goes away, I don't know. But I don't necessarily see it as a bad thing. I think it's a bit of a driver. Perhaps my views on kind of where I've got to with presenting and modelling are probably going to pull me down because I'm far too arrogant about what I've done.
Well, I suppose you've got that extroverted energy that can pull you through, right? Whereas I think probably for many artists, especially if in illustration, where you don't need to really engage with anybody. Like a photographer, especially if you're shooting talent, you need to engage, right? You need to develop a relationship. So either you have it already because you're innately personable, or you recognise in order to be better, you are going to have to work at that, and therefore you're driven to be able to do that. Whereas again, for a lot of illustrators, you're at home. You're either working on a screen, or you're using paper, or you're doing drawings, paintings, but you're doing your craft more often than not in isolation. And then when it comes to sort of meeting with a client and things like that, you haven't had that experience of being able to do that. And I think, when you asked about the question about sort of breaking into the industry, one of the things is just about confidence, in being able to be personable and understand and ask the right questions. So the role of the agent is making sure that they feel that they are well equipped, but also backed up and well covered, that if they were to make any small mistakes or drop the ball and things like that, there's someone there. But it's interesting to sort of see how creatives, there's an assumption out there that creatives can be outgoing and full of energy, but it takes all sorts to deliver all types of creativity. So it's managing that.
Do you find that anybody who is more of an introverted energy, who's regardless talented and creative, is at a bit of a loss when it comes to selling their work compared to maybe the extroverts? I think it's less about sort of introvert and extrovert, because I did again, in my career I've done some sort of training and coaching specifically on Myers-Briggs, and so one of the key learnings for me was that anyone can be an introvert or an extrovert. It just takes more energy to be either or, depending on which side of the scale that you are. So I'd felt like I was maybe introverted because I can do this, but as I said before, when we talk about that networking and things, I'll come home and
I feel exhausted. Like I'm capable of doing it, but it drains me because I get a sense that it might be the opposite for you, and actually it gives you energy, and you're off of that, and you could go on and do that more. And so I think it's less about introvert extrovert and more about a confidence in your work. And once a lack of confidence starts to come through, then you can see it in the questions, you can see it in the body language, you can see it in the demeanour, and I think that's probably the hardest thing. And sometimes that lack of confidence comes through when maybe there hasn't been a job or as many jobs as you would have liked, because then you start to think, well, maybe people don't like my work. And because it's so personal, your work, you're being judged for you. Probably like being a model, right? Or being a musician. There is nowhere to hide. It's you, your face, your physique, your body shape, your skill, your craft is what's being judged. Whereas obviously in sales, it's really your gift of being able to sell something else. And so you're never really attached to that thing. So I can understand how it is for them. But I think it's more about confidence than it is necessarily about that introvert and extrovert. I've seen some introverted people really gear themselves up and be unbelievably on point in chemistry meetings.
Yeah, it must be really cool to see your kind of, what would you call them? Your artists, I suppose. Your artists kind of killing it and winning contracts and doing stuff that fulfills them and pays the bills. Yeah. Do you find, either personally or with your artists, there's ever a moment in those kinds of meetings where they like what the artist has done, but they want to change it for whatever reason or move it in another direction? And how do you resolve that?
Yeah, that requires some diplomacy, I think, is the way to describe it, because and I think actually having 20 plus years of sort of sales, I mean, I hate the word sales, but I have to call it, sales experience, right? It has allowed me to be able to manage that. But you recognise that the client will always believe that they're right, they're paying the bill, so you can't really push it. But then ultimately, they've commissioned someone for a reason, and there's a truth to the way that they apply their craft. There's a process, and you will get separate emails where the feedback's come through and the client's there, and we're a bit frustrated that some of our feedback's not really been taken on board. And you've got you got an artist that'll be going, why did they commission me and ask me to do this when they can see that my work is like this particular way? Why didn't and almost you can sense that they want to say, why don't they just do this themselves? And it's like, oh, okay. And so you're mediating sort of between the two. And I think a confident agent, and I've only really learned this in sort of the last 6-7 months, but I think a confident agent will back the artist, because ultimately they're yours, right? It's you live and die by your artist as an artist management agency. And I think ultimately, if you can wrap that confidence in a way that a client is going to accept that feedback, then I think they respect that more. Now, there's always the odd thing where they go, listen, I understand that, that's great, Darren, yes, we respect that, that's what we want. Okay, all right, I understand, we've hit a hard line, and we're going to have to deliver ultimately what you want. But I think the pushing back on the creator, and that's where the subjectivity of the work comes into your strength, because you can say, this is why it is, this is why it's that, and you can't really argue against it. We just like a bit of a lighter pink. We could just go around days, couldn't we, around Pantones, around different types of pink. We just feel it slightly warmer, and it's like, well, it shouldn't really be about feelings, should it? It should just be about what we think is the strongest work. And I think, there's a lot of mediation that comes to it, but I like to think that we back the artists, because without that, they would lose confidence even further.
Yeah, it's really, really important. Come back to your kind of your point around the management, and as we're having this discussion as well, I'm thinking on both sides. As an artist and kind of understanding or trying to understand what an agent has to go through, and you sharing your experience. We talked at the beginning about the creative industry, being artistic, being musical, being having this sort of skill set. But at the end of the day, it is an industry. And there's a lot of business savvy that you need to survive in it. I talked about the amount of times I'm just replying to emails or doing edits and making sure my head sheet is filled in correctly. Talking about managing egos. being personable to a brand new person, new crew every day, really, in my world, and just getting to know people, which I love, but maybe might not be natural to a lot of other people. It's also part of our industry is reaching out to people, dealing with people, having those conversations sometimes that are a bit difficult, which I think adds to the richness of what we do as well. It's not just work with the same people in the same scene, delivering the same thing,
but also getting paid. Right? If our artists, we take care of that for them in terms of like invoicing and making sure they get paid. You've got an agent that makes sure that you get paid. But if you don't have an agent, you've got to file those invoices. You've got to send them off. You've got to chase. You've got to do credit control. You've got to do accountancy. You've got to do bookkeeping. Yeah. So there's so much more. And look, there are great institutions and organisations like the AOI and the AOP who provide a lot of support for photographers who are probably out there on their own and wondering how to do it. But it's not just a purity of going out and taking a picture. It's everything else that comes with it. Even just the sense of marketing yourself on Instagram. I mean, with the algorithm changes, you just can't put up nice pictures anymore, right? You've got to have something interesting to say. You've got to run that as a Reels, which means you've got to shoot small video, which a lot of people aren't necessarily prepared to do. You've got to have a point of difference and an opinion on something. So it's the platform that was set up to be perfect for stills artists now being taken away from them, and that's a big issue as well. Not to mention the advent of sort of AI development of art, and whether your copyright work is suddenly going to appear in something that you had no idea, because an AI algorithm doesn't no idea whether your work was your work or not, and suddenly you find that something's being pulled up for a commercial campaign out there, and you're like, well, how do I sue them? How do I even sue that money?
I thinking about talking about all the things that an agent does for you, the big one that I'm so grateful for over the years, has been so important for me, is contracts. That someone has got an eye on that, and someone can chase that and deal with that. And for anybody who's listening, if you see me in anything, in any country, in any territory, please let me know. Because it's happened so many times, and I've been lucky enough to be on the right side of things, and actually in the middle of something. I can't say much obviously here at the moment, where someone said to me, a good friend, "Oh yeah, I saw your ad the other day. Yeah, where you do this and you do this," and I'm like, "Yep, you're not mistaking me. I definitely did that ad, and you saw it the other day. Yeah, it was on ITV." I'm like, "Did you take a picture? Have you got proof for this?" And I'm just going through this big circle at the moment, being like, somebody owes me a lot of money. And actually, thankfully, my agent is dealing with it. Whether they'll be successful or not is another thing, because they need the proof, etc. And I have been very fortunate where they have chased things for me and said, "Hey, you know what? Someone's using this where they shouldn't be. We're going to get the money for you." And that support that you get, where you if it was me by myself, I wouldn't necessarily be able to do. But probably not. Imagine the legal fees alone and trying to hunt this stuff down. Yeah, and it feels about me against a big brand or a big corporate, and they'll send some sort of formal wording to me, and I'll be like, "Oh, maybe I did agree to this. I don't know." But it was 8 years ago. How could I possibly agree to something staying on for 8 years? But I think usage and copyright less so, because I think it's probably there's more legislation around the protection of that. But usage, the idea that people say, "Oh, don't worry, we're only going to use it for next year, probably only in the UK and probably only across our social," and then 2 years time you're seeing it in the Far East on a big outfit billboard campaign. You're like, whoa. I'm suddenly aware actually that we're falling into a trap of maybe talking about things that are really common to us, but just for people who aren't in this industry, do you mind elaborating on what we're talking about in terms of usage?
There's one of the biggest fees, if you like. So there are two main things for a visual artist, if you like, specifically a photographer and an illustrator in our sense of Studio Pi, is that there would be the fee that you would need to pay for one of our artists to create that piece of work that you're briefing them on. Then there's another fee, which is for you to then use that piece of art in any context that you've decided. So, for example, in the context of the Ian Wright Google campaign that we were part of, that was to go digital out of home in the major cities around the UK for a period of a year, and to be a paid campaign. So there's various loadings or multiples of your rate that would increase as the usage of that artwork expands. So if there's something that was going to be a global campaign and you're shooting Brad Pitt and it's going to be a Dior campaign, it's going to go globally in 75 different territories and all this different, then you can stand to make a ton of money on the assumption that they pay you fairly for that usage. Sometimes what happens, it doesn't happen very often, but it happens enough for it to irk a lot of people, is that there'll be an initial agreement about what that usage is, probably on the smaller side and on a limited number of channels, and then suddenly it will leak into something, or you'll see it somewhere in the way that you just described with one of your friends, that you know that you
other
can
countries
agree,
the one happens a lot.
well, hang on, that's actually the definition of being unfair now, because you don't own that.
Yeah.
I created that, I own it. We agreed that you could have it for this, this, and this, and now you're using it over there for that. You owe me money. And I think that's where bigger brands and bigger egos can probably take advantage of lesser confident people. And then that's like you say, that's a big role of the agent in the protection of the rights of artists and their copyright and their usage, and ultimately what they created, because that's why you asked them to do it in the first place. So yeah, it's a tricky one. I mean, I hope that was clear enough. I hope that sort of
yeah, no, I mean, it's difficult because I understand. And I would say actually the big example from my world is you work on something and you've signed it off for usage in the UK, and then your friend comes back from somewhere in Europe and says, "Hey, great ad! I saw it in Germany." You're like, what? But also, I suppose coming back to the how important having an agent is, I think about, and maybe it's changed now in this creator economy, you know, my conversations with David George and how much money is in influencer marketing. I remember when I first started working with people who got into the industry via platforms like Instagram, they were just really grateful to be paid. And when you're sitting down with them and talking how much they were getting paid, you're like, you're not getting paid enough. This isn't the going rate. But because they were finally getting paid for all the work they were doing, they were like, "Oh, this is fantastic, someone's paying me to do my hobby." And I was like, they're not paying you what they should be paying you, though. And it's really difficult. I think that's changed. People are more aware now. I think there's more conversation around what the acceptable rates are. But again, an agent's going to protect you with that. I'm curious to hear, you talked about Instagram particularly as a platform that was around still photography and sharing beautiful art and images. What kinds of things, in all these years now you've been in the creative industry, what's the biggest thing you've had to adapt to in how we work, how we commission work, how we get work?
That's a good question. I feel like the answer should be TikTok, but we don't embrace TikTok. It isn't a platform necessarily for us right now because of the focus on stills. I mean, look, we're a small team. We're a team of 5, so the idea of suddenly now having to take on another social channel and not a small one, right? You know, that's a thirsty, high maintenance, at least I would view it, channel. So I think the biggest challenge for us at the moment is that flip between the so-called desire for motion. And I think there's been quite a few high-profile Instagram accounts and influencers who have said that they don't believe it should be this type of platform. I was very happy for it to be this. I remember the Kardashians coming out, I think, when that announcement was made around the algorithm, and we don't want it to be about reels and videos. We can go somewhere else for that. I just wanted to look at nice imagery for my friends, and obviously Instagram went, well, that's fine, but we see where the money is, and that's what we're going to do. And you've got to respect that. They're a business, and they want to move. But they've seen TikTok, and they want to try and head that off at the pass. So for us as a stills focused business with artists that do that, I think it's navigating that. So we're running a social media campaign at the moment, right? A paid social campaign, but we've stitched together stills to make it feel like motion reels, and we've got soundtrack running over the top. But not everyone can do that. You know, I'm fortunate enough to, like I said, to have wealthy and patient investors who are willing to let us trial a few things. But again, if you're a photographer on your own, well, you now got to add to all the things that we've just discussed around what you've got to do. Create a show reel that then gets exciting enough to be maybe shown on a platform that I hope that people will see. So for us, I think that's probably the biggest challenge that's going to come. The most exciting thing that we're looking forward to is what art might look like in the metaverse. I mean, I imagine that's another podcast, right? So let me know when you want to do part 2, and I'll bring on some of the artists who will talk for days around how excited they are about producing art in the metaverse. But that is going to be a really interesting one, mainly because no one really knows what to do right now, and I think if you can get artists who feel like they can be a creative force in that space, that's exciting, because it isn't coming from Meta, or it isn't coming from a corporate business who is ultimately going to make money out of how many people use the metaverse. So it's actually going to come from creatives who say, no, this is just really exciting, and actually we can do this, and these are the sort of innovative, technologically advanced options that we can do that make this art even more interesting. So we're gonna start looking at how, specifically with one of our new artists, Polygon 8, who are a multidisciplinary duo, 2 brilliant guys, around how we might start just talking about that more and raise the profile of Studio Pi and artists in that world. So that feels like the most exciting thing for us in this world about what we want to try and learn more about, really.
I mean, it sounds exciting, but equally terrifying. Yet another platform that I can't even begin to fathom. And I know.
And that's before our daughters start deciding that they're going to go out in the metaverse. And I'm like, what do you mean?
Oh gosh, now that will have to be another podcast. I don't know how we're going to tackle that one, or who is best placed to talk about it, but that would be interesting. Gosh, so it moves so fast, doesn't it? The pace of this industry. It's Moore's law in action. Moore's law about kind of technology exponentially getting better and better. And I'm a bit squeamish now thinking about all these other platforms that I might need to get my head around. Interestingly enough, I'm starting to see in contracts now when we talk about usage. So one of the terms that we might see in a contract is usage in perpetuity worldwide, which basically means they can own it forever and use it all over the world. It's less common to see that with big brands, thankfully, but you do see it every now and again, particularly with the smaller ones. What I'm now seeing is usage in perpetuity worldwide and the known and unknown universe as a sentence on a contract. Because I think somebody somewhere has realised, hey, if we start putting people on Mars and using that out on Mars, we're going to have to pay these guys again.
Yeah, exactly. And NFTs have sort of been the advent of that. And it's basically saying, listen, for the small sum of money, we're just going to own what you just made for us forever. Thanks very much.
I could see little hands there. You're in the right in at the right time. I've taken a lot of Dad's time. It's been a thoroughly enjoyable conversation. Darren, before we go, please let our listeners know where they can find out more about you and Studio Pi.
Come to the website. We've just had a new one launched. It's just brilliant. It's a great new website. All the artists are given all the space that they deserve now to showcase their. So it's www.studiopi.co.uk. We're on Instagram as well. They're the main 2 for us. So yeah, come and have a look. Come check out the artists. Let us know what you think.
Awesome. And in true dope black dad fashion, we need to return to our daughters. Thank you very much for listening. I've been Marcus Rantoul, and you've been listening to another Dope Black Dads podcast.